The desert wind carried sand that stung like needles against exposed skin. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez adjusted his position on the rocky outcrop, his ghillie suit blending perfectly with the barren landscape. 3 days he had been watching this valley. 3 days of patient observation through his scope. The Taliban compound below showed no signs of the high-value target his intelligence suggested would be there. Rodriguez was a different breed of soldier. While most Marines craved the adrenaline of direct combat, he found peace in the solitude of his sniper hide. His world consisted of wind calculations, breathing patterns, and the delicate dance between heartbeat and trigger pull. At 32, he had already completed 4 tours in Afghanistan, each one adding another layer of skill to his already impressive abilities. The compound sat in a natural bowl surrounded by jagged hills. Ancient mud walls formed a rough rectangle, with several buildings clustered inside. During daylight hours, Rodriguez had counted 12 fighters moving about their daily routines. They were careful, disciplined. This wasn't some ragtag group of insurgents. These men knew what they were doing. Through his radio earpiece, Rodriguez heard the familiar crackle of encrypted communications. His forward operating base was 40 miles away, but the special operations frequency kept him connected to the broader mission. Tonight would be different. Intelligence had finally confirmed that Abdul Qadir, a key Taliban commander responsible for multiple attacks on coalition forces, would be arriving at the compound. The plan was simple in concept, complex in execution. A SEAL team would insert via helicopter, under cover of darkness, neutralize the target, and extract before dawn. Rodriguez's role was overwatch, providing reconnaissance and eliminating any threats that might compromise the mission. As darkness began to settle over the valley, Rodriguez performed his pre-mission ritual. He checked his rifle for the 100th time that day. The M110 semi-automatic sniper system was an extension of his body after years of training and combat. Every scratch on the stock told a story. Every modification served a purpose. The bipod legs were adjusted to account for the slight slope of his position. The scope was zeroed perfectly for the distance to the compound. The first helicopter appeared as a distant speck against the star-filled sky. Rodriguez watched through his night vision scope as the aircraft approached the landing zone. A flat area, 2 kilometers from the compound. The pilots were skilled, keeping the noise signature minimal as they descended. Even from his elevated position, the helicopter was barely audible over the constant desert wind. 8 figures emerged from the aircraft and immediately disappeared into the shadows. These were Navy SEALs from SEAL Team 6, the most elite warriors the military had to offer. Rodriguez had worked with special operations units before, but never with this particular team. Their reputation preceded them. These men could move through hostile territory like ghosts, striking with precision before melting back into the darkness. The SEAL team leader, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, was a legend among special operations forces. At 29, he had already led more successful missions than most operators managed in entire careers. His team consisted of 7 other highly trained specialists, each one capable of handling multiple roles but excelling in their primary function. Rodriguez watched the team begin their approach to the compound. They moved in a tactical formation, using natural cover and shadow to remain invisible. Their route had been planned meticulously, taking advantage of dead ground and avoiding potential observation points. Even with his advanced optics, Rodriguez had to concentrate to track their movement. The compound sentries were alert but not expecting trouble. 2 guards walked the perimeter at irregular intervals, while others remained at fixed positions near the main entrance and corner towers. Rodriguez noted their patterns, timing their movements with military precision. Any change in routine would be his first indication of trouble. 20 minutes into the approach, the SEAL team reached the outer wall of the compound. Morrison's voice came through Rodriguez's earpiece, calm and controlled, despite the dangerous situation. The team was in position, ready to begin the assault phase of the operation. Rodriguez shifted his position slightly, ensuring he had clear fields of fire on all potential escape routes from the compound. His primary targets were the guard towers and main entrance. If the operation went wrong, the SEALs would need covering fire to break contact and reach their extraction point. The night air was crisp and still, perfect conditions for accurate shooting. Rodriguez controlled his breathing, entering the meditative state that all skilled snipers knew. His world narrowed to the view through his scope, his finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. Inside the compound, lights moved behind curtained windows. Rodriguez could see the heat signatures of multiple individuals through his thermal imaging device. The target building was the largest structure in the center of the compound, a two-story dwelling that served as both residence and headquarters for the local Taliban cell. Morrison's team had rehearsed this mission multiple times at a replica compound built at their training facility. Every door, every window, every potential hiding spot had been memorized. They knew exactly how many steps it would take to reach each objective, how long each phase should require, and what their backup plans would be if things went wrong. Rodriguez heard the faint sound of movement below as the SEALs began scaling the compound wall. Their movements were silent, professional, deadly. These men had trained for years to reach this level of proficiency. Every muscle movement was calculated, every breath controlled. The first phase of the assault began at exactly 0230 hours. Morrison's team moved like a perfectly choreographed dance, each member knowing their role without need for verbal communication. They used hand signals and pre-arranged movements to coordinate their actions. Rodriguez watched two SEALs neutralize the perimeter guards with suppressed weapons. The guards dropped silently, never knowing what hit them. The rest of the team moved immediately toward the main building, their night vision goggles giving them a significant advantage over the sleeping Taliban fighters. The compound erupted into chaos as the SEALs breached the main building. Muzzle flashes lit up windows as the terrorists inside realized they were under attack. Rodriguez could hear the distinctive sound of suppressed M4 carbines mixed with the sharper cracks of AK-47 rifles. Through his scope, Rodriguez saw a Taliban fighter emerge from a side building, carrying a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. The terrorist was moving toward a position where he could threaten the SEALs inside the main building. Rodriguez's crosshairs found their target, his breathing stopped, and his finger moved to the trigger. The shot was perfect. The Taliban fighter dropped instantly, the RPG launcher clattering harmlessly to the ground. Rodriguez immediately shifted his aim, searching for other threats that might emerge from the surrounding buildings. More fighters began pouring out of their hiding places as the reality of the attack became clear. Rodriguez's rifle spoke again and again, each shot carefully placed to eliminate threats to the SEAL team below. His position gave him the perfect vantage point to see the entire battlefield and provide the covering fire that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophe. The firefight intensified as more Taliban fighters joined the battle. These weren't ordinary insurgents. They moved with discipline and purpose, attempting to establish fields of fire and coordinate their defense. Rodriguez could see their tactical training in the way they positioned themselves and communicated with each other. Morrison's voice came through the radio, tense but controlled. The team had located the target and was beginning the extraction phase. Abdul Qadir was alive, but wounded. Exactly as the mission required. Intelligence officials wanted him for questioning, not martyrdom. Rodriguez continued his deadly work from the hilltop, his rifle eliminating threats with mechanical precision. Each shot was the result of years of training and combat experience. Distance, wind, target movement, all calculated in fractions of seconds before the trigger pull that would determine life or death. The SEAL team began their withdrawal from the compound, carrying their wounded prisoner and fighting their way through increasingly desperate resistance. The Taliban fighters knew they were losing their leader and were willing to die to prevent his capture. As the team moved toward their extraction point, Rodriguez noticed movement on a distant ridgeline. Enemy reinforcements were arriving. Attracted by the sound of gunfire, these fighters carried heavy weapons and were positioning themselves to cut off the SEALs' escape route. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. What had begun as a precision raid was evolving into a running gun battle with unknown odds. Rodriguez knew that without immediate intervention, Morrison's team might not make it to their helicopter alive. The desert wind had picked up, adding another variable to Rodriguez's calculations. At extreme range, even the slightest atmospheric change could mean the difference between a hit and a miss. He adjusted his scope settings and prepared for the most challenging shots of his career. The Taliban reinforcements were setting up a machine gun position on the ridgeline, a perfect spot to ambush the retreating SEALs. Rodriguez estimated the range at over 800 meters, pushing the limits of his rifle and ammunition. The shot would require perfect technique and a little luck. As he prepared to engage the distant threats, Rodriguez heard Morrison's voice on the radio. The team was requesting immediate backup. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running low on ammunition. The extraction helicopter was still 10 minutes away, and the Taliban forces were closing in from multiple directions. Rodriguez's finger found the trigger as his crosshairs settled on the machine gunner. The fate of 8 elite warriors now rested in the hands of a single Marine sniper, hidden in the darkness above the valley. The night was about to become much more dangerous for everyone involved. The machine gunner never heard the shot that killed him. Rodriguez's bullet traveled across the valley in less than a second, striking its target with lethal precision. The heavy weapon fell silent before it could unleash its devastating fire on the retreating SEAL team below. But more fighters were emerging from concealed positions throughout the valley. Rodriguez realized this wasn't just a Taliban safe house. It was a staging area for a much larger operation. The intelligence reports had been wrong. Instead of 12 fighters, there were at least 40, possibly more hidden in the surrounding caves and buildings. Morrison's voice crackled through the radio, strain evident despite his professional composure. Overwatch. We've got multiple contacts closing from the north and east. Request immediate support on grid reference 41 SMD 1234567890. Rodriguez didn't need the grid reference. He could see the Taliban fighters moving through his scope, their heat signatures bright against the cool night air. They were attempting to surround the SEAL team, cutting off all escape routes to the landing zone where the extraction helicopter waited. The sniper's training took over completely. Years of muscle memory and combat experience compressed into pure instinct. His rifle became an extension of his will, reaching out across the darkness to touch his enemies with silent death. Each shot was calculated not just for accuracy, but for maximum psychological impact on the surviving fighters. Rodriguez's first priority was the fighters carrying heavy weapons. A man with an RPG appeared from behind a stone wall, aiming at the building where the SEALs had taken temporary cover. The terrorist's finger was on the trigger when Rodriguez's bullet found him. The rocket launcher exploded harmlessly into the sky as its operator crumpled to the ground. 3 more Taliban fighters were advancing on the SEAL's position using a dry riverbed for cover. Rodriguez could see them clearly through his thermal scope, their body heat standing out against the cold rocks. He adjusted his aim for the lead fighter, a tall man carrying what appeared to be a light machine gun. The shot was perfect. But Rodriguez didn't pause to admire his work. He was already tracking the second fighter, a younger man who had frozen in shock at seeing his leader fall. The second shot came 3 seconds after the first, followed immediately by a third that eliminated the remaining threat in the riverbed. Morrison's team was moving again, bounding from cover to cover in a tactical withdrawal toward their extraction point. Each movement was coordinated and professional, but Rodriguez could see they were running low on ammunition. Their rate of fire had decreased noticeably, and they were conserving shots for only the most immediate threats. The Taliban commander on the ground was adapting quickly to the sniper threat. Instead of advancing in the open, his fighters were using smoke grenades and coordinated movements to mask their approach. Rodriguez found himself playing a deadly game of chess, trying to anticipate where the enemy would appear next. A group of fighters had worked their way around to the south, attempting to flank the SEAL team's position. Rodriguez couldn't get a clear shot from his current position due to a large boulder blocking his line of sight. He made a quick decision that would either save the mission or expose him to enemy fire. Abandoning his carefully prepared hide, Rodriguez moved 50 meters to a new position that offered a better angle on the southern approach. The movement was risky, potentially revealing his location to enemy spotters, but necessary to maintain effective overwatch of the battlefield. From his new position, Rodriguez could see the flanking fighters clearly. They were good, using proper tactical spacing and cover, but they weren't expecting precision fire from nearly a kilometer away. Rodriguez's rifle spoke 4 times in rapid succession, each shot eliminating a threat before the Taliban fighters realized they were under attack. The enemy commander was getting frustrated. His carefully planned ambush was failing due to the unseen sniper, who seemed to anticipate his every move. Rodriguez could see the man through his scope, gesturing angrily at his subordinates and pointing toward the hills where he suspected the shooter might be hiding. Morrison's team had reached a small stone building halfway to their extraction point. The structure offered good cover, but was also a potential trap if the Taliban could surround it. Rodriguez counted at least 20 fighters still active in the valley, all converging on the SEAL's position. The situation was becoming desperate. The extraction helicopter was still 5 minutes out, and the Taliban forces were closing in, despite Rodriguez's efforts to thin their numbers. The SEAL team would need to hold their position until the aircraft arrived, but they were critically low on ammunition. Rodriguez made a decision that went against every principle of sniper warfare. Instead of remaining hidden and picking off targets of opportunity, he would become the primary focus of the enemy's attention. By drawing their fire, he could relieve pressure on the SEAL team below. His first shot wasn't aimed at an enemy fighter. Instead, Rodriguez put a round through a fuel barrel near the main compound, creating a spectacular explosion that lit up the night sky. The blast served as both a distraction and a signal to every Taliban fighter in the valley that there was a sniper in the hills. The effect was immediate. Dozens of AK-47 seconds opened fire in Rodriguez's general direction, their muzzle flashes, creating a deadly light show against the darkness. Most of the shots were wildly inaccurate, but a few came uncomfortably close to his position. Rock chips and dust kicked up around him as high-velocity rounds impacted the hillside. But the plan was working. The Taliban fighters were focused on trying to locate and eliminate the sniper threat, giving Morrison's team precious breathing room to consolidate their position and prepare for extraction. Rodriguez continued his deadly work, moving between shooting positions to avoid the incoming fire. His rifle found target after target, each shot carefully placed to maximize both lethality and psychological impact. The Taliban fighters were brave, but they were also human. Watching their comrades fall to an invisible enemy was taking its toll on their morale. The sound of rotor blades echoed through the valley as the extraction helicopter approached. Rodriguez could see the aircraft's navigation lights in the distance, growing larger as it neared the landing zone. The pilot would have to land under fire, extract the SEAL team and their prisoner, and escape before the remaining Taliban fighters could organize an effective response. But new problems were emerging. Rodriguez spotted several fighters carrying shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles moving toward positions where they could threaten the incoming helicopter. These weapons could destroy the aircraft instantly, killing everyone aboard and stranding the SEAL team in hostile territory. The first missile team was setting up behind a stone wall approximately 600 meters from Rodriguez's position. The operator was experienced, taking his time to properly track the approaching helicopter. Rodriguez had perhaps 30 seconds before the man would be ready to fire. Wind conditions had changed since the beginning of the engagement. Rodriguez quickly recalculated his holdover, adjusting for both distance and the crosswind that had picked up as the night progressed. His crosshairs settled on the missile operator's center mass, just as the man shouldered his weapon. The shot was one of the finest of Rodriguez's career. At extreme range, in poor lighting conditions, while under enemy fire, he placed a single bullet exactly where it needed to go. The missile operator dropped instantly, his weapon clattering harmlessly to the ground. But there was another missile team moving into position on the opposite side of the valley. Rodriguez swung his rifle toward the new threat, but realized immediately that the angle was wrong. The fighters were using dead ground to mask their approach, staying hidden behind a ridgeline that blocked Rodriguez's line of sight. The helicopter was less than 2 minutes out now, its engines growing louder as it descended toward the landing zone. Morrison's team was preparing to move from their defensive position, ready to sprint the final 300 meters to their extraction point. Everything depended on Rodriguez eliminating the remaining missile threat before it could engage the aircraft. Rodriguez made another tactical decision that violated standard sniper doctrine. He abandoned his elevated position and began moving down the hillside toward a spot where he might get a clear shot at the hidden missile team. The movement was dangerous, exposing him to potential enemy observation and reducing his overall situational awareness. As he moved, Rodriguez could hear Morrison's voice on the radio, calm but urgent. The team was beginning their final movement to the landing zone. They would be completely exposed during the sprint, vulnerable to any Taliban fighters who might emerge from cover. Rodriguez reached a new shooting position just as the second missile team appeared from behind their concealment. The operator was already tracking the incoming helicopter, his finger on the trigger of a weapon that could end the mission in a ball of fire. Time seemed to slow as Rodriguez settled behind his rifle. The helicopter was descending rapidly, its pilot unaware of the deadly threat aimed at his aircraft. Morrison's team was halfway to the landing zone, running across open ground under scattered but accurate enemy fire. The missile operator was seconds away from achieving a perfect firing solution. Rodriguez's world narrowed to the view through his scope. His breathing stopped, his heartbeat seemed to pause, and his finger began the slow, steady pressure that would determine the fate of everyone in the valley. The shot had to be perfect. There would be no second chance. The rifle recoiled against his shoulder, just as the missile operator's finger tightened on his trigger. Rodriguez's bullet arrived first, striking the man in the upper chest and spinning him away from his weapon. The missile fired wildly into the sky, its heat-seeking guidance system unable to lock onto any target. The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and rotor wash. Morrison's team reached the aircraft and began loading their wounded prisoner while maintaining security around the landing zone. The pilot kept his engines running, ready to lift off at a moment's notice. Rodriguez provided covering fire as the SEALs boarded their extraction aircraft. His rifle spoke repeatedly, keeping the remaining Taliban fighters pinned down until the helicopter could safely depart. Only when the aircraft was airborne and climbing away from the valley did he allow himself a moment to breathe. But the mission wasn't over. Rodriguez still had to extract himself from a valley full of angry terrorists who now knew approximately where he was located. The helicopter that had extracted the SEAL team was already flying toward their forward operating base, unable to return for a lone sniper without risking another aircraft and crew. Rodriguez was on his own, 40 miles from friendly forces, with limited ammunition and water. The Taliban fighters would soon organize search teams to hunt for the sniper who had devastated their ranks. The real test of his survival skills was just beginning. Rodriguez watched the helicopter disappear into the darkness, carrying Morrison's team and their valuable prisoner to safety. The successful extraction should have been a moment of triumph. But for the lone sniper remaining in hostile territory, it marked the beginning of the most dangerous phase of his mission. The valley below was alive with movement as Taliban fighters organized search parties. Their leader, a veteran fighter named Malik Hassan, had lost over half his men to the invisible sniper. The systematic precision of the attacks told him this was no ordinary shooter. This was someone with extensive training and combat experience. Someone who would be extremely dangerous, if not eliminated quickly. Rodriguez gathered his equipment with practiced efficiency. Every item had to be essential for survival and movement. Extra ammunition, water, medical supplies, and emergency rations went into his pack. Everything else would be left behind. Within 10 minutes of the helicopter's departure, he was moving away from his shooting position. The sniper's route had been planned weeks earlier during mission preparation. 3 different escape paths led from his overwatch position to potential extraction points, each one taking advantage of terrain features that would mask his movement from enemy observation. Rodriguez chose the northern route, the longest but also the most defensible if he encountered pursuit. Moving at night through hostile territory required different skills than combat shooting. Rodriguez became a ghost, flowing through the landscape like mist. Every footstep was placed carefully to avoid loose rocks or vegetation that might create noise. His breathing was controlled and quiet. His equipment was secured to prevent any metallic sounds that might betray his position. The Taliban search teams were methodical but predictable. They used flashlights and moved in groups, making enough noise to be heard from hundreds of meters away. Rodriguez could track their progress by sound alone, staying well ahead of their search pattern, while moving steadily toward his first waypoint. 5 hours after beginning his escape, Rodriguez reached a rocky outcrop that offered both concealment and a commanding view of his back trail. He set up a temporary observation post and used his thermal scope to scan for pursuit. 3 separate search teams were visible in the valley behind him, their heat signatures bright against the cool landscape. The Taliban fighters were persistent, but not particularly skilled at tracking. They were following obvious routes and failing to properly secure the areas they had already searched. Rodriguez could see gaps in their coverage that would allow him to double back if necessary, but his best option remained continuing north toward his primary extraction point. As dawn approached, Rodriguez found himself in increasingly difficult terrain. The rocky hills were giving way to more open desert, offering less concealment from aerial observation. The Taliban had access to helicopters and might begin aerial searches once daylight provided better visibility. Rodriguez took shelter in a small cave system that his pre-mission reconnaissance had identified as a potential hide site. The caves were barely large enough for one person but offered complete concealment from both ground and air observation. He would wait here during daylight hours and continue his movement after dark. The cave was uncomfortable but secure. Rodriguez rationed his water carefully, knowing that dehydration could be as deadly as enemy fire in this environment. He monitored his radio for any communications from his headquarters, but maintained strict radio silence to avoid detection by enemy direction-finding equipment. Throughout the day, Taliban search helicopters passed overhead multiple times. Rodriguez could hear their engines echoing off the canyon walls as they searched for any sign of the elusive sniper. The pilots were thorough, using multiple search patterns to cover the area systematically. By mid-afternoon, Rodriguez heard ground vehicles approaching his position. Through a crack in the cave entrance, he could see a convoy of pickup trucks carrying armed fighters. They were conducting a detailed search of the area, checking every potential hiding place along the route the sniper might have taken. The Taliban fighters were getting closer to his position. Rodriguez could hear their voices echoing off the rocks as they called to each other and coordinated their search efforts. One group was methodically checking caves and crevices less than 200 meters from his hiding place. Rodriguez prepared his pistol and fighting knife, knowing that if discovered, he would have to fight his way out at close quarters. His rifle would be useless in the confined space of the cave system. This would be a battle for survival using the most basic weapons and tactics. The voices grew louder as the search team approached. Rodriguez could distinguish individual words in Pashto as the fighters discussed their search pattern. They were being thorough, checking every possible hiding place with military discipline that surprised him. Footsteps echoed from the cave entrance as one of the Taliban fighters began exploring the narrow opening. Rodriguez pressed himself deeper into the darkness, his finger on his pistol's trigger. The fighter had a flashlight and was methodically examining the cave walls and floor. The beam of light swept past Rodriguez's position, missing him by inches. The Taliban fighter was young and nervous, moving quickly through his search rather than taking the time to be completely thorough. After 30 seconds that felt like hours, the light disappeared and the footsteps retreated. Rodriguez remained motionless for another hour after the search team moved on. Only when he was certain the area was clear did he allow himself to relax slightly. The close call reminded him that his survival depended on remaining invisible until he could reach friendly forces. As darkness fell again, Rodriguez prepared to continue his journey. The second night would be more dangerous than the first because the Taliban now had a better idea of where he might be. Their search pattern would be more focused, and they would likely establish checkpoints along potential escape routes. Rodriguez moved carefully through the darkness, avoiding the most obvious paths and staying in dead ground whenever possible. His night vision equipment gave him a significant advantage over his pursuers, allowing him to see them long before they could detect his presence. The terrain was becoming more challenging as he moved north. Deep ravines and steep cliffs forced him to take longer routes around natural obstacles. Each detour added time and distance to his journey, using precious energy and water that he couldn't afford to waste. 12 hours into his second night of movement, Rodriguez reached his primary extraction point. The site was a flat area large enough for a helicopter landing, located in a valley that offered good defensive positions on the surrounding hills. According to his mission plan, a rescue helicopter would be waiting for his emergency beacon signal. But the extraction site was occupied. A Taliban checkpoint had been established at the exact coordinates where Rodriguez needed to be picked up. 6 fighters with heavy weapons were positioned to control the valley approaches, and they showed no signs of leaving anytime soon. Rodriguez studied the enemy position through his scope, looking for weaknesses in their defensive setup. The Taliban fighters were alert and well-positioned, making a direct assault suicide for a single man. He would need to find another solution or move to one of his alternate extraction points. The alternate sites were both over 20 miles away, requiring another full night of movement through increasingly hostile territory. Rodriguez's water was running low, and his physical condition was deteriorating after 2 days of stress and limited sleep. He made the decision to eliminate the checkpoint guards and use his primary extraction point as planned. 6 targets, at ranges varying from 300 to 500 meters. The shots would have to be perfect because once he opened fire, every Taliban fighter in the area would know exactly where he was. Rodriguez found a shooting position on a hillside overlooking the checkpoint. The range was moderate, and the lighting conditions were adequate for precision shooting. His biggest challenge would be engaging multiple targets quickly before they could take effective cover or return fire. The first shot took the checkpoint commander, a tall man who appeared to be directing the other fighters' activities. Rodriguez's bullet dropped him instantly, creating immediate confusion among the surviving guards. The second and third shots followed within seconds, eliminating the 2 fighters manning the heavy machine gun. The remaining 3 Taliban fighters scattered for cover, but Rodriguez had anticipated their movements. His 4th shot caught one man as he dove behind a rock pile. The 5th shot eliminated another fighter who was trying to reach a radio to call for reinforcements. The last Taliban fighter was young and panicked. Instead of seeking cover, he stood in the open and sprayed automatic fire in Rodriguez's general direction. The shots were wildly inaccurate, but they revealed the fighter's position perfectly. Rodriguez's final shot ended the brief firefight. The extraction site was clear, but Rodriguez knew he had only minutes before reinforcements arrived. He activated his emergency beacon and began preparing defensive positions around the landing zone. The rescue helicopter would be vulnerable during its approach and landing, requiring covering fire to ensure a successful pickup. Rodriguez could hear vehicle engines in the distance as Taliban quick reaction forces responded to the sound of gunfire. Multiple trucks were converging on the valley from different directions, carrying fighters who would arrive before the rescue helicopter. The first truck appeared on a ridgeline 3 kilometers away, followed quickly by 2 more vehicles. Rodriguez could see armed fighters dismounting and beginning to advance on foot toward the extraction site. His ammunition was limited, but he would have to hold them off long enough for the helicopter to arrive and complete the pickup. Rodriguez's rifle spoke repeatedly as the Taliban fighters attempted to close on his position. Each shot was carefully aimed to maximize the psychological impact on the attacking force. He targeted leaders first, then fighters carrying heavy weapons, creating confusion and hesitation among the survivors. The distinctive sound of rotor blades echoed through the valley as the rescue helicopter approached. Rodriguez could see its navigation lights in the distance, growing larger as the aircraft descended toward the landing zone. The pilot would be flying into a hot landing zone, requiring courage and skill to complete the extraction under fire. Taliban fighters were now within 200 meters of Rodriguez's position, close enough that he could hear their voices shouting commands and coordinating their assault. His rifle ammunition was nearly exhausted, forcing him to transition to his pistol for close-quarters engagement. The helicopter touched down 50 meters from Rodriguez's defensive position, its crew chief laying down covering fire with a mounted machine gun. Rodriguez sprinted across the open ground under intense enemy fire, diving through the aircraft's open door just as the pilot began to lift off. Bullets struck the helicopter's fuselage as it climbed away from the valley, but the aircraft's armor protected the crew and passenger from serious damage. Rodriguez collapsed on the cabin floor, exhausted but alive, as the rescue crew administered first aid and prepared him for the flight to safety. 3 days later, Rodriguez stood in a secure briefing room at Bagram Air Base, debriefing his mission to a room full of intelligence officers and special operations commanders. Morrison's SEAL team had successfully delivered their prisoner, who was already providing valuable information about Taliban operations in the region. The mission had been a complete success, but Rodriguez knew it represented just one small victory in a much larger war. Somewhere in Afghanistan, other snipers were taking up positions to provide overwatch for other missions, ready to whisper their deadly answers from the darkness when their brothers called for help. Rodriguez cleaned his rifle one final time before turning it over to the armory for maintenance. The weapon had performed flawlessly when his life and the lives of 8 elite warriors depended on its accuracy. In the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, precision fire and steady nerves had once again proven that sometimes the difference between success and failure came down to one person. Hidden in the darkness, ready to reach out and touch the enemy when the call came for backup, the SEAL team had asked for help, and the darkness had answered with the quiet professionalism that defined America's military snipers. In a war where technology and firepower often dominated, human skill and courage remained the decisive factors when warriors found themselves in desperate situations far from home.